Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. We're glad you're here for today's webinar, Worth the Ask, Navigating Salary from Yes to No. I'm Greg Berry, Director of Communications in the Office of Alumni Affairs. A disclaimer, as with any virtual event, occasional technical hiccups may occur. If you experience any video or audio issues, simply click Reconnect or refresh your screen to return to the presentation quickly. Before we dive in, we'd love to learn a bit about you. Please take a moment to answer this quick poll. How confident do you feel negotiating salary or benefits right now? Are you very confident, somewhat confident, neutral or unsure, somewhat anxious, or very anxious? Go ahead and make your selection. We'll take a look at the results in just a few moments. Just a heads up, we are recording today's session. Our live audience will get an email with the link once it's ready, most likely early next week or later on this afternoon. We're hoping to get it to it this afternoon. We're excited to have Stephanie Yates back with us for the fourth time. Dr. Yates is the inaugural director of the Regions Institute for Financial Education and the Regions Institute for Financial Education Endowed Professor. She obtained her MBA and MBE from the University of Cincinnati before earning her PhD from LSU. Dr. Yates is an accredited financial counselor, certified financial planner, and a registered financial consultant. Now for the results of that earlier poll, I'm going to go ahead and stop that. How confident do you feel negotiating salary or benefits right now? 41% of our audience said somewhat anxious, second place neutral or unsure, 20% somewhat confidence. Meanwhile, let's go ahead and ask another question. And thank you so much for those responses. Before we turn over to Dr. Yates, we're asking, if an employer says no to your initial ask, what's your typical reaction? Do you accept the offer as is, ask clarifying questions, make a counter offer, feel discouraged and pause, or you haven't been in this situation? We'll go ahead and keep that poll up for a bit so you can select your response. At this time, I'd like to turn things over to Dr. Yates. Welcome back, fourth time.
I feel like Saturday Night Live, where maybe I should get the jacket the next time, five times.
And thank you so much for pinch hitting and allowing us to keep this webinar on the books.
Sure. So are we ready to get started? Oh. You already muted yourself, so I guess
that's one of those technical hiccups that you just never know is going to happen. Yes, it is all yours. We are ready to rock and roll.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Let's just dive right in. I found it interesting that on that first poll, 0% said they were very confident with negotiating. So let's see what we can do to move the needle today. So what we want to try to achieve in more specific terms regarding improving your confidence is help you to understand your market value, because when you have a better understanding of how you fit into the market and what you have to offer versus everyone else that you're competing against, that tends to help improve our confidence. And so we're also going to talk a little bit about full compensation, because sometimes negotiating isn't just about the salary. And then we'll help you figure out, well, what's your negotiating strategy going to be? And then give you a little bit of practice on how to respond to those multiple offers that you might get down the road. So negotiation matters for a number of reasons. And sometimes we just don't stop and think about this and think about why we need to be a little bit more careful with those first offers. And the first thing is, your first offer usually isn't the best one. And I think it helps to look at this from the other person's perspective. So I've been on both sides of the table, so I get it. If I think I can hire this person a little bit cheaper than what my budget would allow, then that's a win for me as the employer. So I may start a little bit lower than what I have in the budget just to see if I can do that, because in my world, that's that's good business. And so that's why that first offer usually isn't the best, because oftentimes employers have a little bit more room. Now, there's some people who say, well, I don't do that haggling. This is what I've got, take it or leave it. And that may be true. But for some other firms or employers, they may have a little bit more room to work with. And from your perspective, realize that once you start with a company, and I know most people these days don't stay with the same company forever, but even still, when you go to a new company, they may ask you, and they're not supposed to, but it's not illegal, but they may ask you what you were making previously. And so where you start off is going to impact you financially, whether you stay at this company or you move somewhere else. Because think about it. If you stay with the company, even short term, your future increases are going to be a percentage of your current salary. So if you're starting lower, then that percentage increase is going to be lower. But if you start a little bit higher, then the increase is going to be higher. If you move somewhere else and they ask you, well, how much were you making before? They're going to potentially base their offer on what you were making previously. Again, because if you were at a low level someplace else, they can maybe save money by just getting you higher, but maybe not as much as they can afford to pay. So you want to start off as high as possible. Now, one caveat to that is that jobs tend to have a salary range. So if you start off in the high end of the range, there is a possibility that your increases might be a little bit lower because you don't have that very much room to grow. But when you're early in your career, the goal for a lot of people, not everyone, the goal is to keep moving into higher positions where the range is wider. So just something to keep in mind. Also, and we'll talk about this in a little bit more detail, is that the benefits are part of the offer as well. And so you've got to be thinking about the whole package. And because particularly larger firms do this all the time, they're probably expecting you to push back and they're expecting you to negotiate. Now, the tricky part is when they ask, in game theory, we talk about this in terms of first mover advantage. So when they ask you for your expected salary range, you're kind of starting that negotiating conversation even before you've been offered the job. So those are all things to think about early on. And so we're going to go into more and more detail. But remember, I said I wanted you to think about your value. And so if you're thinking about a particular position or a field, you've got to do your homework. So you've got to see what the normal salary range is. You may not be able to find out what company XYZ is paying, but you should have an idea either from the Bureau of Labor Statistics or Glassdoor or just your own personal or professional networks, what the range is for that job, so that when they ask you, what's your expected salary, you can be somewhere in that range. Also, when you try to decide what your value is, where in that range you should fall, think about, okay, am I towards the top because I have all these special skills and I've had all these internships, I've had all these experiences that maybe the average person has not had? Or am I at the lower end because I'm kind of reaching to get into this field, and so I'm just going to be entry level? Also, think about the geographic differences. So I was just talking to another group about that first job offer, and I was telling them, if you are considering positions someplace other than where you're currently living, you absolutely want to account for the cost of living, especially if you're thinking about moving someplace that's more expensive, because it's very easy to just think about your current standard of living, your current earnings, wages, salary, and say, oh yeah, that's a little bit more than what I'm making now. That would be a good deal. Forgetting the fact that maybe the cost of living is 1.5 or 2 times what it is where you are now. So there are places on the internet where you can go and look up a cost of living calculator. Suggestions are NerdWallet or Bankrate, where you can put in the 2 cities, like your current city and the city that you're thinking about, and you can see what a comparable salary is in that other city. And then you always have to think about, what's my floor? At what point do I just walk away from the negotiating table because I'm just not willing to take X? For some people, that floor may be very, very low because you really want to do this kind of work. You really want to work for this company. So that's going to be a very personal and a very unique decision depending on the circumstances. But that's something you need to think about too, because, and we were just having this conversation, you don't want this extended negotiation and back and forth period. You want to know, okay, this is what I'm worth. This is the minimum I'm willing to take. And that's that. It makes the negotiating a little bit easier because you've got some guardrails. Now, I mentioned that benefits are part of that total package, part of the negotiating. So let's talk about that. So obviously we start with base salary, and that's very important, but let's think about the things that get added on top that are also worth considering. Bonuses and incentives. In some places, in some fields, that's a real thing. Things like signing bonuses and incentives. If the company does well, you do well. I was just watching the news last night, and they're giving signing bonuses to bus drivers. So that's a real thing depending on the field, particularly if it's a high demand like bus drivers, where they just can't find anybody to fill these jobs. So they've got a bucket of money to just throw at you to make that happen. So is that a possibility? And I know young people tend not to think about this very much, but we old people will tell you you should be. And that's retirement contributions. So not just, is there a retirement plan and how much can I contribute to it and where do my contributions go? But what you want to ask, and this may not be a negotiating point, but it's something that you want to understand. And that question is, how much does the company contribute to my retirement? Is it a matching contribution? Is it, am I not required to match at all? What do I put in? What does the company put in? And that will vary greatly from employer to employer. So that's something that you want to know. I have to tell you, when I was on the job market many, many moons ago, and I was interviewing with multiple employers, I had a standard list of questions that I would ask along these lines, because these are really a big deal. And I wanted to make sure that I asked or I researched the same thing for each prospective employer so that I could compare apples to apples when I was making my final decision. Also, health insurance and benefits. So most employers offer health insurance, but what else do they offer? Do they offer vision or dental? And how much do you have to pay versus how much do they pay? Do they fully pay the cost of the employee's health insurance? How much do they pay for a family? Whatever is important to you with regard to health insurance. Some people might care if the employer offers pet insurance, but you want to take a look at all of those things that are being offered and weigh that into your total compensation package as well. For a larger company, you should be able to just go to their website, do your homework, and find those things out. Oftentimes when you're interviewing, particularly when you're talking to the hiring manager, they may not know some of these details that you want to know. And then the last one is extremely important these days, and that's flexibility. And that may be something that you can negotiate. Hey, can I work remotely 1, 2, 3 days a week? How much paid time off do I get? That may not be negotiable, but you want to know it. What's the schedule? We have a lot of accounting majors in the School of Business, and they go to these public firms, and it is just a brutal schedule. And so finding out what the expectations are is going to be really important. And if there's any flexibility or any way to negotiate that, that will be huge, particularly these days when it's not just salary, it's quality of life. So you want to think about the entire compensation picture and how it will impact your life. So I've kind of touched on this. So you should be able to negotiate salary, possibly signing bonus. Also, can they help you with relocation funds? So if you're going to move to another city to take this position, how much can they give you? Sometimes it's easier for companies to give you big signing bonuses and upfront money like relocation assistance versus more salary. What about profit sharing? Usually not negotiable. But it could be. Certainly the schedule I talked about, that remote work, professional development. So this is a big one, particularly when people are starting off in their careers and they don't think about it. If you have ambitions to move forward in your career, professional development is really helpful. So you might want to ask a question like, is there a professional development budget for me to go to conferences? If you are in a particular field and it has an association like the Association for the Prevention of Cruelty to People in this field, you might want to go to their annual conference so you can interact with like-minded individuals and grow your network. So find out if the company will pay for you to go to those types of events. And this may seem simple, but you can certainly usually negotiate your title and the scope of your role. If you want to learn more about X and have that worked into your role because you're thinking about your long-term opportunities and your long-term potential for growth, that would certainly be something that you want to include in the negotiating. My son was on the job market a couple of years ago, and one of the things his mentor said to him is that one of the most important things about your first job is setting you up for the second job. And so that's why the professional development, the title, the scope, and all of those things matter, because you want to be able to tell the second job, well, I've done this, this, and this. I've been involved with this organization and that organization. So these are things that you can typically negotiate, but most people don't really realize it. So now, when do you start that negotiating? Not until you have the offer. So a lot of the things I've been talking about already, you can research on your own. Large company, go to their website, find out about the benefits, find out anything you can about their structure, their organizational structure, so that once you get to the point where you've received an offer, you can start asking these questions, but not until you have the offer. So you want to be super enthusiastic. Oh, I'm so excited that we've developed a good rapport and that you want me to join the team. Let me think about this for a moment. And then you can start preparing your counter offer. So how do you do that? How do you make the ask? How do you negotiate that offer? Absolutely, you want to be professional. And I actually would say professional first and confident second, because you don't want to come off as cocky. And again, I've been on both sides of the table, so I've seen this in action. But there's something about a quiet confidence that kind of makes people notice and makes people want you to be on your team. And you want to have data to support what you're asking. So this is where doing your homework, going to the company's website, going to the Bureau of Labor Statistics to see what typical salaries are, Glassdoor, all the places that we've talked about, and even talking about the change in cost of living. So, hey, I'm going to need more than that because in LA, New York, Chicago, the cost of living is X. Again, when my son was on the job market and he was considering jobs in other cities, the first thing he would do is, well, he'd look at the cost of living comparison, but he'd also be very practical about it and start looking at apartments. Not because he was putting the cart before the horse, but he was asking himself, okay, if I truly move to this city and take this job, where would I live? And based on what they're offering, could I afford it? And so I always gave him the rule of thumb that your housing shouldn't be any more than 30% of your pay. And so he'd go on apartments.com and look at what a 1-bedroom or 2-bedroom apartment would cost. And he'd figure out, okay, well, then they need to pay me this so that I can afford to live here. And so that's the kind of data that you want to develop. And you want to ask a little bit more than you need because they may come back with a counter to your counter. And you don't want to sound like it's an ultimatum and this is my final offer. You just want to have a conversation. You just want to have some friendly back and forth. Hey, so really not hey, but I really appreciate your offer. I'm delighted that you think so highly of me. And I was doing my research, and for me to be comfortable in your firm, this city, whatever, fill in the blank, I'm going to need a few other things that I'd like to talk about. And when you're having that conversation, some suggestions on what language to use I've already mentioned, but again, sharing your enthusiasm genuinely. Don't just say it, but make it obvious that you are very pleased that they would like you to join their firm. But let the data drive. So meaning make sure that when you're making the ask, it doesn't come off as emotional or egotistical. I think I deserve more. Based on data, your research, your experience, the cost of living in this city, you want to ask. And so maybe you don't ask specifically, I need you to pay me X number of dollars a year. But you start the conversation because remember, it's just a conversation back and forth. You start the conversation with, is there flexibility in this offer? Particularly in the salary or in the schedule or in the signing bonus. And so I'd like to have a conversation about all of the elements in this package. Or I'd like to find out what other elements are included in this package besides just the salary. Maybe you're perfectly fine with the salary, but you need a flexible schedule. Maybe you've got a family. Maybe you've got some commitments that you need to work around. Now, what if you come back with your brilliant ask? You've done it politely, professionally, enthusiastically. You've led with the data. You've explained why you think the ask is justified. And the answer is no. You don't want to pack up your tent and go home abruptly. Stay professional, stay positive, stay enthusiastic. Ask if there are any items in the offer, in the package, that are negotiable or flexible. Ask if any of the items would be flexible down the road. Meaning, okay, so if the package is this and there's no flexibility to change it at the outset, at what point could we have that discussion? Once I prove myself, because I know that I'm going to work really hard and earn your trust, make you very pleased that you've made the decision to hire me. At what point could we revisit this conversation? And then at some point, you just have to make a decision. And that decision has to be based on what's important to you. Whether it's work-life balance, I need a certain amount of money because, I don't know, mama needs an operation or whatever it is that you've got going on. But what you don't want to do, and I think I saw this in the polls where people just say, I'll just take it. You don't want to do that immediately. Whether it's the initial offer or the counter offer or even the no after you've made your counter offer. Always, and I try not to say always and never, but always ask for time to think about it. Even if you just say, okay, what's the deadline on this offer? How much time do I have to consider this? Again, very politely, enthusiastically. And so I've talked many times about the importance of research. Another big mistake. People just get all excited about having the interviews. And this is especially common when you've got multiple interviews and they just don't take the time to do the research. I can't tell you how much I hate it to interview someone and they know nothing about the position. They've done zero research whatsoever. Or they're just so focused on salary that it changes my opinion of the person because, they're just going to go to the highest bidder. They're not thinking about the position, the company, the long-term growth opportunities, or they're just overly aggressive. That can, how just in any setting that can rub you the wrong way, or they're apologetic. If you recognize your value, you should be able to just be yourself and not apologize for anything because you know that you are worth what you're worth. So you want to just be careful about all of these items. So whether they've said no or they've come back with a counteroffer or you didn't even negotiate at all, you've still got a decision to make at some point. And your framework should be based on a few things such as, does this position and the package that I'm being offered align with my goals? Maybe you have some family commitments or some extracurriculars that are really important to you. Are you going to be able to support these other things with the package that they're offering? Does the compensation meet my needs? I have a list of things that I'm trying to do financially. I've got financial goals. Am I going to be able to meet those goals at this salary? And sometimes the answer is no, but there's so much growth potential that it's worth it. Sometimes we take internships that are low paying or not paying at all, because to be able to intern at XYZ company right now with all the things that they're doing, that's going to sell itself once it's on my resume. So that should be part of your decision framework. And then the organization itself. Are you going to be proud to work for this company or work at this company? Is this a place that you could see yourself? We always talk about fit, and that works both ways. Are you a fit for them, and are they a fit for you? So those are all things that you need to be thinking about as you're making this decision. It's not as simple as, are they paying me big bucks? So that was a whole lot of stuff. And I think we'll be able to take questions in a moment. But what I want you to be thinking about are these takeaways. And I've said it so many times that you've got to do your homework. So you need data on your value and the value of the position. What is this job worth? What is it paying? What are other people making? You may not be able to find specifics for that company, but you should get an idea of what people doing this kind of work generally make, and what additional benefits do they receive. And keep in mind that it's not bad or negative to negotiate. In many circumstances, that's actually expected. And so if you don't push back, if you don't, and not just on salary, but just push back on anything, that may be surprising to some employers. But again, not just on the salary, think about the total package. So you're negotiating all of the things that are important. And think about it this way. It's so much easier to negotiate before you start than later on. Meaning if you really want to be remote on one day a week, it's so much easier to have that conversation before you actually start and have it go well than later on when you're locked in and they're used to you being there 5 days a week. So just be very confident, because the data helps you to be confident. Data on your worth, data on the typical salary ranges and all the things related to the firms that you're interviewing with. Having that data helps you to be more confident. And I know that 0% of the folks here said that they were very confident in negotiating. And that is the key to how you become more confident. So I will let you check the chat and open it up for questions.
Fantastic. And I'm going to go ahead and drop that first poll in again, just to see if that changed at all with how confident you feel negotiating salary benefits now.
You're putting me on the spot. How did I do?
I think you did fantastic. So, if you do have questions, go ahead, drop them in the chat. We have time for those right now. So I'm going to kick things off. So at what part of your career, because I know you mentioned that you started to come up with questions, a list of questions for employers. to be part of the negotiating process. At what point of your career did you actually do that? I imagine it wasn't right out of college for the first time. I think it probably came a little bit later.
It did come later, and I will be honest. The interview process for certain fields is different than others.
Yeah.
And after I got my PhD, the way that we interview for jobs is just crazy. And so, when you go on the market, you go to these conferences, and I want to say I interviewed with 20 plus universities in the span of one weekend. And so I'm a little extra. I had a folder. I went to this conference. I had a folder for each university. And in that folder, I had plastered my questions. So I had the same questions for each university. So when I went to the interview, I whip out my folder. Okay, what about this, and this? So that when I went back to my room that night, I could compare the folders. And so yeah, that wasn't something I did right out of undergrad. But when I was in a situation where I had so many different people that I was talking to, and I needed to compare apples to apples, that's exactly what I did.
Questions are now rolling in. So if the salary and compensation offer meets your expectation, should you still try to negotiate, or do you just ask for time to review and then respond with accepting the offer?
So my answer to everything is it depends. So yes, you ask for time, always ask for time. And then it depends on how competitive. So if they've got the number 2 candidate is breathing down your neck and you're really okay with what they've offered, maybe you say yes. But again, look at the total compensation. What about flexibility? What about maybe there's no signing bonus, but just make sure that you've thought about all of the components that are important to you. And if there's any one of them that's a little bit off, then you may want to ask about that. Ask if there is flexibility in that particular thing. But if you are fine with every single aspect of it, then it's not the end of the world to just say yes after you've taken time to review.
Are these tactics applicable to requesting a salary increase or promotion in an existing position?
I think so, because, and again, I'm looking at it from both perspectives. I think the first thing is having your data. And here is a caution. When you are negotiating for an increase after you've already been on the job, my biggest pet peeve is that increase is not based on what anybody else in your unit is doing. It is about you and the value that you add and the value of your particular position. Meaning, don't go in there saying, well, I know that Johnny got a 3% increase and I only got 2, so I want 3. Unless it's a very particular situation and there's legal ramifications or something like that, I don't recommend that. I recommend that I think that you can make a better case by, just like we've talked about, doing your homework about all of the things, all of the value that I add. So that's knowing your worth. So what are all the things that you've done? How did you meet or exceed expectations? And what is the salary range? And where do you fall in that range? Average pay increases are in the 2 to 3% range. So you can use that as a basis and think about, do you calibrate your ask? Are you above or below average? And factor that in. But yes, to answer the question, yes, I think that these techniques could be used for your for a salary increase request as well.
And that kind of segues right into this. This person has recently completed their DHA degree. How do they go about requesting a raise due to the advancement of their education?
So several ways to look at that. Number one, because this sometimes gets really sticky. Did the employer know that you were getting the degree, and did they support that? Every now and then I'll hear about cases where the employer said, well, I didn't know you were getting that degree, and that provides no value to us. So you've got to make the case for why this advanced degree provides value. And does it help you in your current position, or does it help you get to a different position? But overall, you want to show how it provides value to the company. And so that's a very important one. And, in some industries, it's just automatic. You show that you got the degree, and then they move you to a different schedule. So it just kind of depends on the industry.
When negotiating the entire package, is it helpful, hurtful, or doesn't have any impact when you add context to your request? Example, I'm a mother, I have da-da-da-da-da.
It depends on the request. So if the request is about flexibility in your work schedule, then I think that's where that makes sense. Because it's better to have those conversations early than once you're on the job and all of a sudden you're asking to leave early all the time because you've got to pick kids up from school and things like that. So been there, done that. So I think in certain instances, yes, it makes sense, but it does not make sense maybe for salary. And I've had this happen to me as the employer before, where someone will say, well, I've got a family, so I should get paid more. No, you should not, because you're doing the same job. So my answer to your question is, yes, I think it matters, but you have to think very critically about where it matters. So how you're negotiating for your total compensation on the job, but you are doing the same job as someone who does not have a family. So you want to be careful. So in the case of flexibility, I'm still going to work the same number of hours, but I have these other things going on. And so I just need to shift my hours.
So quick follow-up to that. Should that request go to the direct supervisor or HR?
I think it needs, if it's a flexibility question, I think possibly both, but I think it needs to start with the direct supervisor because they need to know what's going on with you. And it sometimes, once you start having conversations with the direct supervisor, it gets a little touchy if you go straight to HR, because that looks like you're trying to avoid the direct supervisor. The only times where I would recommend that you go straight to HR instead of the direct supervisor is if it's a legal issue, where the direct supervisor is doing something wrong and you need to talk to HR about it, or if it's some sort of HIPAA issue, or where you have some sort of illness or some sort of issue that requires or is protected in terms of confidentiality. And you only need to discuss that with HR, and then HR will go back to the direct supervisor and make the accommodations.
If in your current position, the raise you expected is not awarded, is there a good way to convey that you are looking at other opportunities?
I don't recommend it. That's a sticky one, because that's kind of a I'm packing up my tent and going home response. So I think that's where you just continue to do the job and you're enthusiastic and you quietly do what you have to do. But in many, many instances, as soon as you let a supervisor know that you're looking, you could be treated differently. Mm-hmm. So maybe you are in line for that next promotion or that next big project, and you just didn't know it. But well, you're not going to get it now because you've already tipped your hat. So I would say that it's really rarely a good time to let them know that you're looking for a position. The only time that I typically recommend that you let someone know is when you have offer in hand. And you say, hey, I'm letting you know as a courtesy that XYZ company has made this offer to me. You don't have to divulge the details. You don't even have to divulge the name of the company. And I just wanted to let you know that I'm thinking about it. And that's only a conversation that you have if you're truly thinking about it, because what that does is that gives your current employer the opportunity to counter, and it lets them, but again, you only do it if you're willing to take the offer and walk, because they may say, okay, good luck to you. You can go ahead and pack up your stuff and go now. And you've got to be ready for that. But if they value you and want you to stay, it may be impetus for them to consider giving you whatever it is that they're able to give you to stay.
This individual applied for a position a few months ago, and they were given an offer that was below what they listed as their minimum salary on the application. They asked if there was flexibility with the salary and was told, no, there's no room. What do you recommend doing then?
So that's a hard no. And you have to decide, that then that goes to your decision framework. Do I really want to be there? Does it fit? We talked about the decision framework. Does it fit my priorities, or is there growth potential? And it becomes pretty black and white. Can I afford to live on this? And so I think you go back to, well, why did I set that minimum expectation to begin with? And that, and work that into your decision framework.
If you're changing industry or roles and feel like you may not have the transferable skills that a hiring manager may be looking for, but have the education and experience that could be useful if they're given a chance, how can they frame themselves as a valuable candidate and as one who may need to negotiate an offer?
I think that's an opportunity to talk about fresh ideas, fresh perspective. So, and I think this is where you're transparent and you lead by saying, hey, I may not be your typical candidate, but here's what I have to offer. The interview process, the negotiating process is all about what you have to offer. What can you do for them? What is it about you that is going to add value and make you worth whatever it is that you're asking or they're offering? So if you are switching industries, then the obvious question is why? Okay, why did you choose to go from ditch digging to nursing? And this is a great question. What applicable skills do you? I think I heard somebody snickering about ditch digging to nursing, but it happens. And so the question is, what applicable skills do you have? What did you learn from that that's going to be valuable here? And that can be a really cool conversation, because you can say things like, well, nobody's going to outwork me. I know about hard work, and now I've coupled the education with the hard work, and I'm ready to apply that to patient care. So there's some really cool things that you can say, but I think that in that career change conversation, you really need to be transparent and talk about why, and talk about how past experiences will apply in this situation and help you be a strong candidate.
And the last question, yeah, I did snicker. I love the ad analogy. The last question, and then we'll let you go. Is there an increase range that is a sweet spot for negotiating? As in, is it better to renegotiate more often for small amounts versus waiting longer to renegotiate for a larger increase?
Absolutely wait longer, because here's the problem. If you go back every month or every quarter, then it's going to feel like you're nickeling and diming. And employers don't want to have that. That's a difficult conversation. And then anything with money is just hard, because I've got to go to all these different levels to get approval. I don't want to have that conversation all the time. So, you think about performance evaluations are typically on an annual cycle. So if you can save those conversations for that annual, an annual rhythm or time frame, that's going to work better. But during that 1 year, you should be setting goals for your performance, and then tracking your performance against those goals. Because when we think about performance, we think about, okay, are you meeting or are you exceeding your goals, or somewhere, at the upper and lower ends. So think about, what are your goals and how are you how are you making progress toward them?
And I think we made progress with what we've been talking about, because 80% are now somewhat confident, 10% very confident. So I think it worked.
Mission accomplished.
Mission accomplished. Dr. Yates, thanks so much for pinch hitting and coming back to visit us.
You're very welcome. Love to be here.
And just a quick note for today's audience, this webinar was recorded. Once it's uploaded onto our website, you'll get an email with the link so you can revisit the session and share it with others. As for the next 4 webinars on tap for you, join us for the following. Come back for our Leadership Series finale on April 22nd, when Dr. Matthew Scher presents Leading Infinitely, Building Teams, Trust, and Vision. Then join us May 13th for Fueling Discoveries, Libraries at the Heart of Learning, as we share how libraries are essential to lifelong learning and community engagement. On May 21st, we invite you to return for Stronger This Summer, Nutrition, Exercise, and Safety with Dr. Joseph Copiano. And finally, on May 28th, we'll take a look at the role time plays in your diet, as we welcome Dr. Olivia Altanji for Intermittent Fasting and Meal Timing. Does when you eat matter? Register for all these and more by visiting alumni.uab.edu/events. And as we wrap up, we'd love to hear from you. Your feedback helps us improve and shape future webinar topics. Just scan the QR code on your screen to access a brief survey and share your thoughts. Once again, thanks so much for joining us. And as always, go Blazers.